now I'm very excited to introduce our first keynote speaker. Dr. Sarah Lewthwaite is a senior research fellow here at the University of Southampton Centre for Research and Inclusion, where she leads a major UK research and innovation study teaching accessibility as a Future Leaders Fellow and Principal Investigator. Sarah and her team are researching the teaching and learning of digital accessibility in universities and the workplace to build an evidence-based understanding of how accessibility can be taught more effectively. Sarah has a background in inclusive education and learning sciences, with 20 years of research experience spanning critical disability studies, digital accessibility, research methods, and higher education. Now, we should have a short time for questions after Sarah has presented, so do please, as I say, use the Q&A feature if you want to ask her anything. So over to you, Sarah.
Thank you, Andy. Thank you for the introduction. Welcome, everybody. It's lovely to see so many people here. I won't be able to monitor the chat while I'm talking, so as Andy said, if you can use the Q&A for something that you want to boost up for our Q&A, that would be great. Okay, so I think if you're here, you're likely already aware of the importance of digital accessibility, designing and delivering accessible tools and platforms built with disability in mind. This work supports digital inclusion, and it's fundamental to securing digital rights. Many of us are motivated to build capacity in this field, teaching in different contexts and working to support and advocate for digital accessibility education across those contexts. As Andy mentioned, I know in our audience we have senior academics, emeritus professors, lecturers, EDI specialists, students and professionals. I hope that I have something to say that will be useful and resonate with each of you, but I also want to celebrate the fact that we're all here. Right now, in January 2025, we find ourselves as an accessibility community at a moment of flux. On the one hand, we have actions like the European Accessibility Act, moving to secure digital and physical accessibility in the private sector across Europe and its trading partners. On the other hand, in other territories, such as the US, where there's previously been great progress, digital disability rights are being undermined. And given this uncertain trajectory, I'm glad we're able to come together internationally to share, build and sustain educational activity in digital accessibility. So maybe this is our crossroads. And I want to stress the importance of educators to digital accessibility efforts. In our research, accessibility learners talked repeatedly of the need for accessibility to be pushed up the workflow, instead of accessibility being an add-on or a matter of remediation and fixing. It's about design, it's about project management, agenda setting, accessibility from the get-go and across the piece. I like to think as educators, we're pushing this agenda even further left into the classroom, into professional development, and into those early team meetings where so much peer learning takes place, and junior colleagues see accessibility, expertise, and approaches modelled and also acted upon. So one of the key messages is anywhere that people are talking about accessibility, this is a place where people are learning about accessibility. And there may be important identity work here, particularly for some of you in the audience. I know we have a diverse audience. For some of you, teaching is a defining part of what you do and who you are. For others, considering yourself as an educator rather than a learner or a researcher or a technology specialist may feel more daunting. However, education as a discipline and a research perspective has much to offer, and I hope will allow more of you to develop what you do for greater impact. So, here's my overview. To do this, I'm going to give some background on our project, identify some of the key challenges of teaching accessibility, because these are so generative for the pedagogy of this field. And I'm going to identify some of the pedagogic content knowledge, the unique pedagogy that teachers have developed in this field around conceptual, procedural, and technical learning. Andy gave a brief overview of our project. The project, Teaching Accessibility in the Digital Skill Set, has been about investigating teaching and learning in academic and workplace settings. We've been tasked with developing empirical research and research-led resources and seeking to enhance pedagogical culture and understanding. It's also important to foster dialogue between industry and education, and of course, government, disabled people's organisations, and everybody involved in this shared endeavour. Excuse me. This work was born out of an appreciation of significant challenges that accessibility educators face. And our understanding of these challenges has become far more nuanced as the project has developed. So let's look at some challenges. Accessibility can be challenging to teach. There's a lack of pedagogical culture. This is a deficit, which means that accessibility teachers and trainers cannot inform practice by calling upon a substantial body of resource. Instead, teachers are often reliant on trial and error, technical know-how, or immediate colleagues, rather than pedagogic knowledge informed by theory or research or a much wider community. In educational research, limited pedagogical culture can be typified sometimes by lack of research and systematized debate. We've also seen a lack of agreed curriculum or clear learning objectives, and a need for specific resources beyond general ones. I'm thinking of that really useful survey by Kristin Shinohara and colleagues at RIT looking at who teaches digital accessibility. There's precarity that we see in this field for teachers and for courses. And in subject terms, there are other issues. Accessibility is complex and draws on different disciplinary antecedents. Students often lack prior knowledge of this topic, which can also lack visibility within human-computer interaction, where it's often positioned as a subdiscipline rather than in being embedded more broadly. There are also tensions between logics and politics, which we'll dive into a bit later. What the abstract logics of computer science and the politics of disability as a socio-cultural experience. There's also a need to maintain currency across changing technologies, including assistive technologies, our teaching technologies, and a changing nature of disability itself, our understanding of disability. Some of these factors are sociocultural in terms of these challenges. They are often about the context that educators and professionals find themselves in and the relative newness of accessibility in mainstream higher education. Andy Coverdale, Sarah Horton and I have done a deep dive on this in our paper last year about teaching in context. Hopefully somebody will stick that in the chat for you. Importantly, with developments over the past few years and the shared endeavours of this international community, many of whom are on this call, and our wider colleagues across this field, with those efforts, I think we can say that while the picture is uneven internationally, there are places where pedagogical culture is emergent, and that work towards shared curricula and pedagogic resources is making significant progress. We have some great examples of these activities presented later today. However, some of these challenges relate specifically to our topic, specifically around complexity, the need for student-centred approaches, the logics and politics of computer science, the changing nature of disability, technology and education. So I'll dive into some of these. But in terms of what we found in terms of our overarching situation was that accessibility was often reliant on what our participants called the hero model. Here Cynthia Putnam says, so much of accessibility at university level relies on the hero model. There has to be somebody that brings it there, that valorises it. I think this gestures to how often accessibility can be placed upon an individual as opposed to embedded across a team within our faculties. And Justin Brown adds this about this challenge to our faculty. You need to teach the students, the organisation, the academics to build content that is usable, and then the university to purchase and build digital systems that are accessible by default. There's 3 or 4 very long, difficult battles. So yes, accessibility is challenging to teach. And we'll focus on these topic areas and what teachers have to say about them. But first, it may be useful to give a definition of pedagogy and how we came into this field and what we wanted to focus on. When we define pedagogy, often people talk about the art or science of teaching. I think these definitions on screen give a little bit more detail. And I've been heavily influenced by the work of Melanie Nind in this work. She and colleagues say, pedagogy is what people do in teaching and learning situations, what they perceive to be meaningful, important, and relevant. Further, in her work around pedagogic research methods with Curtin and Hall, Professor Nind says, we can think of pedagogy as specified, enacted and experienced. So specified here is about the planning, what we plan to do in class. Enaction is what teaching looks like in practice. And experience is about that learner perspective, pedagogy as a dialogue. They also say we recognise that pedagogy is hard to know. And this gestures to the often implicit, embodied and craft knowledge that can be difficult to articulate for teachers and is often built over many years. As a result, we have what Bernstein calls invisible pedagogy, and that can limit the potential for teachers and learners to optimise learning and engagement, to reflect on it, discuss it with their colleagues. And by focusing on bringing this into view, we can help to establish pedagogic content knowledge. So pedagogic content knowledge was identified by Schulman, although he refers to this being much earlier in the field. It refers to how generic teaching, skill and approaches, so pedagogical knowledge, intersects with content expertise, the knowledge of the subject matter. And that gives us this sweet spot of pedagogical content knowledge, what is specific to the teaching and learning of digital accessibility. And this can also, we can connect it to this idea of signature pedagogies, some which are implicit, some which are at the surface, and some which are deep. Pedagogic content knowledge translates subject content for learners. This is the expertise that teachers have. For example, this is done through the most powerful analogies or metaphors, illustrations, examples, explanations, and demonstrations for making subject knowledge comprehensible. It's the specifics of teaching this particular subject. And for accessibility, we see maybe particular powerful metaphors being used. For example, parallels with the built environment. We see prior learning that teachers seek to draw upon to address misunderstandings. And beyond backfilling, filling in where learners may have gaps, we sometimes see unlearning required. I'll touch on these further as we go. To establish the PCK that characterises digital accessibility, we conducted research at 3 levels: investigating pedagogy as planned, so teacher values, approaches, strategies; pedagogy as enacted, so teaching in practice, activities, tasks, tactics; and pedagogy as experienced, learner experiences. Excuse me. Data sources included systematic review, international expert panels, focus groups, interviews, collaborative online forums, and in-depth case studies at leading sites of learning. And Andy will be talking about some of these in more depth later today. I have a map on screen now, a global map with some markers showing some of the locations of our participants. These are grouped largely in North America and Europe, but also Brazil, Japan, the Philippines, India, and Australia. And across this work, we found digital accessibility can be characterized as having distinct pedagogy. Research suggests 3 interrelated aspects. Overarching these is complexity. The teaching of accessibility is complex, and it requires the development and integration of conceptual understanding, procedural knowledge, and technical skill. I'm going to dive into these, but to start with complexity. There are these multiple interrelated aspects of accessibility that I think we all experience as teachers. These are technical, legal, social, ethical. There are issues of responsibilitizing our students, helping them understand their responsibilities. There's the need to build accessibility professionalism. There's also aspects such as disability rights, social justice, and the cross-role interdisciplinary activities that constitute accessibility work. And Justin Brown at Edith Cowan University summarizes it a bit like this. So accessibility is like a rabbit hole. It's very hard to teach just a little bit because this leads to this, leads to this, leads to this. And so we see a lot of strategies from educators in interrelating different aspects of conceptual, of procedural, and of technical. And they are dialed up or dialed down dependent on what is required for a particular group of learners in a particular situation for particular learning outcomes. So to dive into conceptual understanding, this is so important, and we see it across the literature, the research literature and the experiential literature on teaching accessibility over the last 20 years. Conceptual understanding is grounded in teaching and learning with, through, and about disability, actively recognising disability as the site of expertise on accessibility. It means actively engaging with implicit and explicit models of disability, be that ableism, techno-ableism, bias, medical, tragic, individual models of disability, and trying to unpick these, to look at social and capability models of disability, addressing post-structural approaches, so sometimes going beyond the social model and teasing out nuance there. Also looking at hierarchies of disability, misconceptions that students have. This conceptual foundation is essential to safe design and development decisions, and it highlights how disability is a praxis. It is conceptual and theoretical, but at the same time very close to the surface informing what people do. And in this respect, digital accessibility is therefore closely tied to transformative pedagogy, pedagogy that may lead to a change in a worldview, unlearning previous approaches and developing new understanding. So one question for us and our team is, should we consider disability, a nuanced understanding to disability, to be a threshold concept in the sense, and it matches Mayer and Land's, analysis, which suggests threshold concepts are transformative. You have a shift in understanding. They're irreversible. Once you see things in a new way, you're unable to go back. This effectively changes who a person is. It's integrative. It reveals new associations between related aspects, and it's bounded, defining conceptual areas. Notably, it's also troublesome. It's challenging and counterintuitive. And that's a real challenge for us if we don't have the luxury of time with students. We often know we have to tailor our methods of appeal when delivering accessibility education, dependent on time. What can you do in an hour to help someone see the world afresh? What can you do in one lecture? What could you add to an established lecture to just begin to nibble away at potentially medicalized, individualized, or tragic models of disability, to allow your students to see disability in an affirming way that allows them to then build and create systems that support autonomy and support disabled people effectively. So within this conceptual understanding space, one of the challenges is prior learning. So effective pedagogy recognizes the importance of prior learning and experience. And James and Pollard, in their work from the Teaching and Learning Research Programme, which was a huge piece of work in the UK, established this principle as being incredibly important, how teaching should build on prior learning, but also take account of personal and cultural experiences of different groups of learners. We see the ways that teachers need to do this for very mixed classrooms and groups where people bring different approaches to disability. But we see that there's often a need for unlearning within this. And I would recommend this paper on unlearning through MAD studies from Curriculum Inquiry. It talks about how we help students to question what is already known, what their beliefs are, and make room for multiple ways of knowing, which is so essential to accessibility work. And Professor Amy Coe in our research added the following: it's really about the role of politics and society and justice in computer science, and disability rights are part of that. But I don't think the students, warmed up to the idea that there are inherent fundamental injustices and inequalities that computer science both causes and perpetuates. And this touches maybe on a fundamental issue, which is around the theorizing of disability, how it's understood in computer science as a disciplinary practice. There's a very interesting paper on infrastructures of abstraction from Malazita and Receta, which talks about how computer science education constructs technical competency, as separate, as split from social, political, and ideological, the political and ideological world. In short, the principles of abstraction construct programming as algorithmic or computational thinking as epistemically neutral tools. So for some of our students, there's no expectation that they're going to encounter lived experience within a critical framework. And computer science, we can say in many aspects, is reinforcing this separation. So we're seeing more and more in critical HCI, human-computer interaction, how people are trying to address this and bring these two worlds meaningfully together. So what do we see in the disability and accessibility classroom? We see simulation and empathy labs, personas, first-person narratives used from text, videos and so forth, but the gold standard really being direct engagement with disabled people. That's teachers themselves and trainers, it's learners, it's expert users, user groups and community groups, bringing people together. And this can't be overestimated. And I think we see from the kind of simulation and empathy labs through to this direct engagement, a move, if you like, from the abstract to the very specific. And the importance of that for transformation is attested to by many of our teachers. So then procedural knowledge is important. This is about what active and experiential learning is, accessibility in practice. This might be about what we do as accessibility professionals. It's ethical decision making, prioritizing, cross-role interdisciplinary working, taking the abstract into practice. And very importantly, it's about tolerating ambiguity. Again, this is a challenge for digital accessibility because it's about an expert competency quite often. Being able to deal with the fact there aren't always clear answers in our work is something that can be challenging for students to take on. And in this procedural knowledge, we see notions like shift left. And there's two quotes from learners here. One about making sure that the person earliest in the process is also checking accessibility, getting people to shift their thinking and say, oh, we need to test this multiple times and every step of the way instead of just at the end. It's kind of difficult. And then there are the technical skills, which we see, in terms of design, coding, programming, content, principles, techniques, user experiences. Integrating these technical, the procedural, and the conceptual. I'm coming to the end here. This is where we see particular ways of doing that I hope will be helpful to you and recognised by you. We do see the use of transformative and critical pedagogies through teaching with, through and about disability. And I know Jane will be giving her keynote looking at critical pedagogy specifically later today. We see the importance of teaching in accessible ways, including our students, including everybody, by embodying and modelling accessibility practice. We see the use of project-based learning, which very effectively integrates the technical with the conceptual and the procedural, giving experience across those pieces, as well as self-directed and peer-supported discovery learning, getting students to lead their own exploration in a supported way to motivate them and help them understand this as a professional practice and a professional community that they can move into. And overall, there is this concern with bridging abstract and political spaces that frequently requires dialogic approaches, talking, communication, sharing perspectives in a safe environment that might not be echoed in other parts of a computer science or an HCI degree. There has to be that space for safe conversations to allow people to move forward with their thinking and understand disability in new ways. So these are some of the things that we've brought forward, and I hope these are of interest. So in terms of next steps, looking forward, we're going to be looking at pedagogy as experienced, focusing on learner journeys. We have our Teaching Accessibility Wayfinder on development, a tool that Andy will talk about later. And as I say, research focused on learning experiences. And if that's something where you have learners who might like to be involved with our work, please get in touch. We're also going to be considering the impacts of AI on accessibility education, which is another topic which links to how quickly content has to move and whether we can consider it as something to harness, something to be aware of, something to critique, and how we do that in and across in a fast-moving situation. But I will leave it there. I'd like to thank you all for your time, and I'm going to stop sharing So hopefully we have time for questions.
Thanks, Sarah. We don't have a great deal of time, if I'm being honest, but I will. We do have a question from Ross and also from Bjorn, and I will, if they don't mind, I will just combine those questions. They both talk about working in universities and about teaching accessibility to colleagues. And Bjorn makes the point, is it only relevant to computer science? What about other disciplines? So that aspect of raising the issue of accessibility to colleagues across different disciplines. Have you got any thoughts on that?
I think the place to start is with disability. In terms of trying to move people forward in this space, as I say, I think it's a threshold concept. And if you see how people, experienced teachers, work in this space, they're looking for particular methods of appeal that will speak to academic colleagues. Sometimes the importance of student voice in that cannot be underestimated. So if you need to advocate, consider reaching out to disabled students in your organisation about the importance of this, because connecting staff to students is so powerful. But I appreciate when time is limited and you need to take people from one place to another, I think what people often do is start with statistics which feel familiar, but then quickly try and deconstruct those to highlight the complexity, and to then move into the social space, and then to move into the specifics of individuals, real people's experience, and showing that accessibility makes a real difference to people's everyday experience. So I think that would be how I would come at it, but I appreciate time is short. But I think we'll have other educators talking today and other researchers too who are going to answer this. And I also see there's a question from Belen, who talks about engagement between students and the disability community. I think this is something that Jane Seal is going to dive into later. So I do invite everybody, if possible, to continue through the day, and more resources and conversation about this will continue. Thank you, everybody.